Have you ever stopped to think about what Legolas' last great deed in Middle-earth was? In my opinion, this is one of the most fascinating parts of the story. Yet, it really gets the attention it deserves. Everyone knows about his skills with the bow, his unlikely friendship with Gimli, and his role in the Fellowship of the Ring. But what did he do before leaving forever? What was his final contribution to the world he helped save? Now think with me. Did Legolas simply bid farewell and sail to the west, or did he leave behind a real legacy in Middle-earth? Was his last act just a personal choice, or did it have a lasting impact on history? The truth is, Tolkien gives us clues about his final journey, and when we analyze the details, we realize that his last deed was not just symbolic, it was a reflection of his entire journey and growth as a character. Hi everyone, I'm Danielle, and if you, like me, enjoy reflecting and discussing the deeper details of Tolkien's universe, subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what country you're watching this video from. I'd love to see how far Tolkien's incredible world has reached. In this video, we'll explore the last great deed of Legolas, analyzing what Tolkien actually wrote and why this was one of the most significant decisions of the Fourth Age of Middle-earth. With Sauron's fall and the end of the Third Age, a new era began in Middle-earth. The kingdoms of men flourished under Aragorn's reign, while the Elves faced an inevitable reality. Their presence in the world was coming to an end. But where did Legolas fit into his new scenario? For years he had fought alongside his companions, witnessed epic battles, and saw the fate of Middle-earth rewritten. Now, with the war over, what remained for an elven prince who had dedicated his life to combat and survival? The newly established peace brought a sense of fulfillment, but also of relentlessness. For many elves, this was the time to live, to heed the call of the sea and abandon Middle-earth forever. However, Legolas wasn't ready for that. There was still something left to do, something that kept him connected to the world of mortals. While Thranduil continued to rule in Mirkwood, Legolas looked beyond his people's forest, feeling that his mission was not yet complete. That relentlessness would lead him to accomplish one of the most important deeds in his life, an act that would mark his farewell to Middle-earth in a grand and unexpected way. This relentlessness that consumed Legolas was not an isolated feeling. He wasn't the only one who realized that. Despite the victory, the world they knew was changing rapidly. His companions from the Fellowship of the Ring, those with whom he had fought battles and faced impossible challenges, were also finding their own paths in this new time of peace. Aragorn now ruled as Elessar, king of Gondor and Arnor, restoring the glory of the kingdoms of men. Gandalf, having fulfilled his mission in Middle-earth, departed for the west. Frodo, Sam and the hobbits returned to the Shire, but not without deep scars from the journey they had endured. Merry and Pippin became notable figures among their people, while Gimli, Legolas' inseparable friend, sought to restore the pride of his race. Faced with this, Legolas knew he couldn't simply return to Mirkwood and continue his life as if nothing had happened. The adventure he had lived, the bonds he had formed, and his broadened understanding of the world wouldn't allow him to return to the isolation of the forest. He now understood men, dwarves, and even hobbits better. He had seen the beauty and the fragility of Middle-earth in a way he never could have imagined before the war. It was this understanding that led him to make a decision that would define his last great deed in Middle-earth, a deed that would not only honor the legacy of the Fellowship of the Ring, but also establish a new chapter in the history of his people and the kingdoms of men. Legolas' decision didn't come out of nowhere. It was deeply rooted in his story, his people, and most importantly, in the figure of his father, Thranduil. While Legolas looked toward to the future, Mirkwood, his homeland, still bore the marks of a dark past. For centuries the forest had been shrouded in shadows, haunted by the presence of Dol Guldur, where Sauron had risen again in disguise as the Necromancer. But now, with the Dark Lord's final defeat, Mirkwood was also undergoing a transformation. Thranduil, always a patient and reserved leader, remained on the throne, ruling with the same wisdom and awareness that defined him. He never sought to expand his power or get involved in the conflicts of men or dwarfs. His sole concern was the survival of his people. But for Legolas, who had fought alongside other races and for unexpected friendships, Mirkwood's isolation was no longer made sense. That's why he never considered taking the throne. Thranduil's rule would continue, steadfast and unchanging, while Legolas felt his mission lay beyond the borders of his homeland. His journey with the Fellowship of the Ring had shown him that Middle-earth still needed elves, but not just hidden away in their forest. It was time to build something new. And it was this vision that led him to one of the most defining moments of his story, the founding of his own elven colony, a place where elves could live alongside men and maintain their connection with the mortal world. Legolas didn't just want to build something new, he had a promise to fulfill. During his years of friendship and battle alongside Aragorn, he had promised that if the war ended and the throne of Gondor was restored, he would explore the lands to the south and lead his people to a new home. And Legolas was never one to make empty promises. Thus, after Aragorn's coronation as Elessar, Legolas gathered a group of elves and set out for Ithilien, a land rich in history but scarred by the devastation of war. Many saw it as a ruined territory, but Legolas saw its potential to be restored to its former beauty. And who better than an elf to bring life back to a wounded land? But this journey was not just about fulfilling a promise, it was also about keeping the connection between elves and men alive. While many elves departed for the west, Legolas chose to stay a little bit longer, helping to rebuild Middle-earth along his friend. Ithilien would become the last refuge of the elves in the mortal world, a testament to the friendship between two races and a bridge between the glorious past and the uncertain future that lay ahead. Legolas did not simply arrive in Ithilien, he transformed the land. What was once been a war revenge territory was now beginning to flourish again, all thanks to the touch of the elves. But this was not just a mission of restoration, it was a new beginning. The elven colony in Ithilien was not a traditional kingdom like Lothlorien or Rivendell, but rather a sanctuary where elves could live in harmony with nature alongside the men of Gondor. For many, this transition was difficult. Elves had always been a reserved people, while men were on the rise, but Legolas saw things differently. He knew that this coexistence could strengthen both peoples, creating a bond that would last for generations. This new mission placed him in a role he had never played before. He was no longer just a prince or a warrior of the Fellowship of the Ring. He had become a true leader, someone who guided his people toward a new future. While Thranduil remained in Mirkwood, Legolas was now forging his own path, creating one last grand dwelling for the elves in Middle-earth. But this journey was still incomplete. Something inside Legolas made him feel that his destiny went beyond reconstruction, and soon he would make the most important decision of his life. Ithilien was flourishing, elves and men lived in harmony, and everything seemed to be on the right track. But Legolas knew this peace was temporary. The Fourth Age had begun, and with it the reality they had been avoiding became increasingly evident. The time of the elves in Middle-earth was coming to an end. Since crossing the mountains and seeing the world beyond Mirkwood, Legolas had realized that the elves could no longer live in isolation as they once did. They still had a role in this new world, but not as the protagonists of his story. That role now belonged to man, and he did not see this as a sorrow of fate, but as a part of something greater, a natural cycle of Middle-earth. But then the great question arose: what to do while there was still time? Could the elves simply hide in the forest and wait for the day to live? Legolas chose the opposite path. He decided that before departing he would do something that would forever mark his presence in the mortal world. And that decision would define his last great deed in Middle-earth. Legolas knew that his time in Middle-earth was coming to an end. He had fulfilled his role, fought important battles, helped rebuild the land, and honored his promise to Aragorn. But just as Galadriel had prophesied years before, the call of the sea was growing stronger. It was time to leave. But Legolas did not simply board a ready-made ship. He built one himself, and this is something incredible when we consider that he was a woodland elf, accustomed to ancient trees and winding rivers, but not to the vast ocean. Even so, he crafted with his own hands a vessel capable of crossing the great sea and carrying him to the Undying Lands. This act was not just a farewell, but a powerful symbol of his journey. That ship was not merely a means of transport, it was a representation of everything Legolas had lived and learned in Middle-earth. He built it with wood and skill, but also with memories, with the essence of an elf who had transcended his origins and explored a world far greater than he had ever imagined. But he would not live alone, and that is what makes this deed even more remarkable. With each passing day, the call of the sea grows stronger. Ever since Galadriel had given him the enigmatic warning in Lothlorien, Legolas had known that this day would come. But knowing is different from feeling. Now he could no longer ignore it. The sound of the waves, even from afar, seemed to echo within his soul. His time in Middle-earth was running out. This moment was not just a logical decision, it was deeply emotional and spiritual. Legolas had spent his life beneath the shadows of trees, listening to the whispers of the wind through the branches, and now he felt a different call, something much greater than himself. It was as if his very essence was being drawn beyond the horizon, to a place he had never seen but had always existed within him. And so Galadriel's prophecy was fulfilled. The one who had lived among the trees, who had walked through dark forests and war-torn lands, was now being called by the ocean. It was the final stage of his journey, the definitive farewell to Middle-earth. But this farewell held one last surprise. Legolas had always known that this day would come, but now he felt that this mission had truly reached its end. The battles were behind him, Middle-earth was at peace, and he had done everything he could for his people and his friends. It was time to leave. Walking towards the ship he had built with his own hands, Legolas paused and looked around. The forest, the rivers, the mountains, every corner of that world told a story. He had lived so much there, shared unforgettable moments, forged bonds that no distance could ever erase. But the call of the sea was too strong to ignore. Without regrets, but with a heart full of memories, he stepped aboard. The wind blew, the sails filled, and slowly Middle-earth began to fade on the horizon. Yet this farewell was not a lonely one. Legolas was not living alone. But this journey was not just a goodbye, it was the beginning of something new. Legolas' ship cut through the waters of the great sea, leaving Middle-earth behind, heading toward a destination that few mortals could ever imagine. He was going to Valinor, the Undying Lands, the home of the Valar and the Elves who had departed for him. The journey across the sea carried profound symbolism within Tolkien's mythology. Valinor was not just a physical place, but a reflection of the natural cycle of elven life. They did not die as men did, but eventually all were called to the west for eternal rest. It was the final destiny of the firstborn, a return to the home that had always awaited them. And now Legolas was making that crossing, following in the footsteps of those who came before him. But he was not alone. There was someone beside him who made this journey even more extraordinary. Now tell me, who could have imagined that a dwarf would travel to Valinor? If there was one thing no one expected to see, it was a son of J.R.R. crossing the great sea alongside an elf. But there he was, Gimli, Legolas' inseparable friend, embarking on the last journey of the Fellowship of the Ring. But how was this possible? Dwarves was never meant for Valinor. They belonged to Middle-earth, created by Allah himself to shape and inhabit it until the end of time. But this time an exception was made, and all because of friendship that defied centuries of rivalry between elves and dwarves. Think about it. How many stories in Middle-earth speak of elves and dwarves truly trusting one another? Almost none. What Legolas and Gimli built together was not just an unlikely bond, it was something so remarkable that even the Valar themselves recognize it. And so, side by side, an elf and a dwarf sailed west, proving that true friendship breaks any barrier, even those of destiny itself. But this story is not just about a farewell, is it? What Legolas did in his final act goes far beyond simply leaving. His deed represents something much greater, the end of an era in Middle-earth and the union of peoples who had long been divided. Think about it. How many times have elves and dwarfs fought side by side in history? Almost never. There was always distrust, pride, and rivalry between these races. And now, at the end of his journey, an elf chooses a dwarf as his companion to cross the Great Sea. This is no trivial detail. It symbolizes a true shift, a new chapter that began with the unlikely friendship of Legolas and Gimli and ended with a journey that defied the very laws of Middle-earth. And you know what else? Legolas did not end his story as he began. At first he was just a woodland prince, a warrior loyal to his people but still bound by elven traditions. Over the years he became much more than that. He grew into a leader, someone who saw beyond the borders of his own race. And in the end he transcended even that. He became an explorer, a traveler with not only accepted but embraced change. His last great deed was not a battle or a military conquest, but rather the choice to walk a new path, to move forward, and to take an unlikely friend with him. And that perhaps was Legolas' greatest legacy. Now tell me, have you ever realized how Legolas' farewell is not just an ending to his story, but something much greater within Tolkien's universe? Elves always had an inevitable fate in Middle-earth. They belonged to this world, but not forever. From the beginning, their role was to be guardians, beings who preserved beauty and magic, but who over time needed to depart. And Tolkien always made it clear, elves do not die like men, but their presence in Middle-earth fades until the time to cross the Great Sea. And wasn't that exactly what happened with Legolas? He lived all he could there. He fought battles, made unexpected friends, built a new home for his people. But in the end, the call of the sea came too strong to resist. Now think about this. Even if he, who opened himself to the world and was part of the greatest alliance in Middle-earth, had to leave, what did that mean for the future of the world? Simple. It was the definitive mark that the era of the elves had come to an end. Men were now the true heirs of Middle-earth. And there is one detail that makes this departure even more special. He did not go alone. Taking Gimli with him was not just a beautiful gesture, it was proof that the world had changed. The prejudice between elves and dwarves had existed for centuries, but in the end, friendship won. When all is said and done, this was one of the most beautiful farewells Tolkien ever wrote, and also one of the most symbolic endings in Middle-earth. So after all this, what does Legolas' last great deed truly represent? Was it just a farewell, or was it a milestone marking the end of an era? The truth is that his departure for Valinor was not just the closing of his own story. It was the symbol of the end of the Third Age and the definitive beginning of an age of man. He was one of the last elves to leave Middle-earth, and his journey was unlike any other. He did not depart merely as an elven prince, but as someone who had changed, who had learned, who had befriended a dwarf and challenged ancient traditions. And that makes us wonder, how many characters had an evolution as profound as Legolas? He began as a warrior loyal to his people, but he became a leader, an explorer, and in the end a symbol of change. His legacy was not a throne or a kingdom, but the proof that even in a world divided by races and rivalries, friendship and loyalty could transcend any barrier. And so, Legolas disappeared on the horizon, along with the last remnants of the elves in Middle-earth. but his story that will never be forgotten. Bye! See you in the next video!